quick update about the status of the product before we turn it over to Michael Plant, who will actually cover the implementation process that we'll be taking various institutions through as they adopt the portal. So the student services portal is actually at a very exciting point in its development. We have completed development on the majority of the features that we think will be in the initial release of the product. We are currently in the pilot phase. So we have various institutions that are joining our pilot environment, beginning to test the product, giving us feedback on defects, experience things that they are finding, which we are then translating into tickets that are fed back into the development team to sort of evolve and enhance the product, make sure that it's as polished and good as it can be before we go to production with it. We are working through an accessibility review to make sure that the user interface meets all accessibility compliance requirements that we have, and as well the content that we are building to be provided alongside the portal being vetted for accessibility issues as well. The planned completion date for the initial release of the portal is the end of June, at which point we will begin slowly rolling it out with the 13 pilot schools that signed up for the program so far. For the product initial feature set, it's important, I guess, before we talk about the features that are included in the portal during the first release, that we sort of pay special attention to the word initial. By no means is the product going to be complete at the point that we roll out at the end of June. That is simply the minimum viable product that we think is necessary to be able to begin letting schools use it and to begin seeing students garnering value from the product. We will, of course, over the coming years, continue to iterate and build features, continue to enhance the products, fix defects that we find, introduce new functionality, so on and so forth. So the initial feature set that is included during the initial production release, one of the major points is the prescriptive user interface. So one of the major guiding principles for the portal was that the user interface needs to be able to guide students various tasks that schools are prescribing to them. So we have various tools and features, including the advisor card feature set, that will essentially assign task lists and service them at a high priority in the user interface to make sure that they understand what's expected of them, that they're guided to those tasks, whether they be inside of the portal or in an external application, and so on and so forth. Institutional branding is really important, so we allow institutions to add their logo, their colors, images that are specific to their campus to make the portal look and feel like a piece of software that is a part of their suite of tools that are provided to students. There is a content management tool set, so it'll be easy for administrative users to log into the portal and quickly and easily stand up essentially content pages without having to go to a software release. The product doesn't need to come out, or the product doesn't need to come down, rather, in order to push out content. You simply can publish it, and then students who have the correct permissions can view the content that you've created. We're also including the ability to integrate external web apps. So basically, the portal has a set of functionalities, content management, user interface, things like that, that are native to it. But we understand, obviously, that institutions are going to be interested in adding functionality to the portal. So it's possible, for example, you might want to add like a calendar application, or you might want to add an application that services maybe your course catalog issues. And so in that case, we are providing services that basically will allow you to pull down the look and feel of the portal into an external web application that you built. You're agnostic in terms of the language that is used to write those applications, so it's whatever's easy experience to use. And then we provide guidelines for ensuring that authentication between the web app that is built and the portal functions correctly, so that students can simply click on a link to the portal, move into this web application that accomplishes the goals that you set out for it. It's design, again, those services that will allow the web applications to look and feel just like a portal does, and then to link them back into the portal when you're done with their shoes, so it all feels like a very contiguous user experience. We have a lot of other exciting things on the horizon that are very exciting. One of the major ones to talk about, for example, would be the rules engine, which we're hoping to release later this summer, which will allow institutions to basically craft rules-based rules that can control the student user experience. So, for example, if you have a student that logs into the portal and during the CCC apply registration process, they indicated they're a veteran, well, you can create a rule using the functionality that will then service all of the veterans-related content to them based on the information that they gave to us. Obviously, that's a simple example to give, but you can go much more in depth with those kinds of things. But really, this is just to say that we have a lot more exciting features that are coming to the portal, and we are looking forward to continuing to roll them out in the cloud environment, collect feedback, and then deliver a polished experience to that finish. Lastly, when it comes to adopting the student service portal, we're always looking for more pilots. We have our initial list of 13, but if folks are interested in, logging into the test environment, creating an account for their school, playing with the tools that are created, we can, of course, we can help that to happen. So, there are a couple steps we'd love to have a conversation with you if you're interested in joining the cloud environment. You can schedule a demo with the CI team. We'll set up a call, do a demo of the product, talk about what your goals are, find out if you have any questions, hopefully talk to your IT staff and address any concerns or questions that they might have, and then hopefully progress with getting you access to the products. And so if you'd like to contact us, you can do so at epi@cccscenter.org. And again, we highly recommend that you go to cccsland.org and read through some of the really great resources we've published on our website. I think with that, I'll turn it over to Michael Plant, who will talk about sort of the topic at hand today, which is the actual implementation and tasks associated with that of the portal.
All right, thanks, Mike. Oh, I went one slide too far. Thank you for that great information. Okay, where am I going? There we go. Thank you, Mike. Great information. In this next portion of the presentation, I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the onboarding process that we've been using to stand up the portal environments for the various institutions. We'll also share some knowledge that we've gathered during our pilot implementations, some that you can prepare for now. And these will help you as you go through your portal implementation, make it a little bit more successful. Basically, we're going to cover some of the basic onboarding steps. The first step of this process will be to do some resource and fact gathering. Here we're going to gather some technical data about your college environment. We'll do a real deep dive into directory services attributes, make sure that we're seeing the data that we need. And the results of this will be to build out a work plan that we can then follow over the next few weeks to get your instance stood up. One of the main components of this will be to upgrade your Shibboleth server. Most likely you have a version 2 server that is being used on your campuses for the CCC Apply application process. But in order to leverage the full feature set, we want to upgrade that to V3. The version 2 is also actually going out of date here this summer, so we want to also get that set up and configured for you. One of the things we want to discuss is the surfacing of the CCC ID. We want to talk about how this is a key attribute and what you should be doing with it. Hopefully you're already doing some of this, but we'll cover that. Finally, we'll get into some metadata and tenant admin info. This is going to be discussing who are the portal admins on each of your colleges that will be configuring your portal instance. We'll pass some metadata back and forth to make sure all of our authentication processes work. And finally, we're going to discuss a little bit about the Common Federation and what some of the value that can bring to you as you move forward in the future. Finally, we'll close up with some portal environment stand-up. We'll wrap up with a few minor details to actually get you logged in and get you the ability to start configuring your portal. All right, so resource and fact gathering. Prior to the kickoff call, what we'll do is identify some needed local resources. This is going to be some staff on your college campuses that have knowledge with such things as your Active Directory or CAS servers, your student information system, ability to grant remote access depending on how you go about your upgrade process, create new servers, etc. We'll also begin some discussion of your Shibboleth environment, particularly beginning to identify if we need any external resources that we may need to bring in and help you get that process upgraded. We'll schedule a kickoff call with the above resources, and during that time, we will do a real deep dive into directory services. There are lots of attributes that we need to make sure are being populated correctly and surfaced so that we can leverage them. We'll also check into some of the other web services that were being utilized on your campus, make sure we're not doing anything inappropriate or extra work because you're already doing it somewhere else. And again, we'll also make that deep dive into the Shibboleth server and find out what kind of knowledge you have on your campus that can do this process. We've built a couple documents along the way. One is the onboarding document. This is comprised of pretty well just the general steps, pretty high level, making sure we've hit the main points. But the SHIB checklist document is a pretty detailed document that discusses all of the attributes, the server values needed, and we will spend quite a bit of time discussing the information that is in that document and making sure we've got it all prepped out properly, which the results of this will be to build out a work plan. Now, we're seeing it's 2 to 8 weeks, kind of depending on various factors, some of which we'll cover here in the upcoming slides, but usually it relates to, obviously, your IT workload. Many of your staff or many of your IT departments are extremely busy, and it takes time to get into their work queue. The other is there may be some data that is needed in some of these directory services, and you may need time to do that. Best case scenario, a couple of weeks, you're up and running. Maybe a couple of months, just depending on what other kind of setup work you might need to do. So after that fact gathering, we'll really step into the Shibboleth server upgrade. Now, one of the things I want to point out at this current time, there are only 3 permutations that will be supported by the Technology Center staff during troubleshooting. That is Active Directory / LDAP, the Portal Guard, as well as CAS. The main focus of doing this will be, the first step you need to do, will be to set up a new server to host your IDP. It's a very small footprint, 4 gigs, single core, 24 gigs of storage, just enough to basically load either a Windows or a Linux OS, and then some space to do some logging. We'll also need to set up some service accounts. We're going to be accessing your directory services for attributes for authentication purposes, and we'll need some service accounts set up to make sure there could be multiples depending on how your infrastructure is set up and whether you have a single domain or single servers or multiple servers. Finally, we'll get into the meat of it. Upgrading from V2 to V3. This is really not an upgrade process. We've built a new server up above, and so we're going to really do a new install of the V3, and then you will copy some configuration settings from your older server regarding CCC Apply and port those over to the new server. You'll configure the server for some services such as the portal, Canvas, the Hobson's tool if you're planning on using that. And then one thing I do want to point out, we want to go through a proper test plan for this. This is your CCC Applied Production, or will be your CCC Applied Production server, so we have to make sure that proper testing is occurring on there. This should be fairly easy to test due to the small number of impacted users. Mainly it's just your back office, admissions and enrollment staff who download applications that leverage the system, possibly some financial aid staff. So it's a fairly simple test, but we do want to make sure that it's done so that there is no impact to your application download. We do want to point out that we know that many folks struggle with Shibboleth knowledge locally. So there are resources available to assist with this step if you guys do not possess the necessary technical skills on staff. We do have a third-party vendor available. Then there's also a handful of assets throughout the community college system that you might be able to reach out depending on your level of need. And of course, there are lots of resources online if you're comfortable going that route. but we will get you through that process. All right, let's talk about one of the key things that we've kind of discovered, which is the surfacing of the CCC ID. This attribute is key to providing services, and particularly in regards to some of the future services such as Canvas and HOPSIS, the OEI and EPI initiatives. And so really what I want to ask you to do is ask yourself some questions. Is the CCC ID stored in your local SIS system? Are you downloading this from CCC Apply and storing this in either SIS or some other data repository? If not, I would recommend you should think about starting that now. If you are storing this already locally, have you surfaced it up to your directory service? And if not, again, I would say you should think about starting this now. These are some things that you can be doing regardless of when you implement the portal, and they will help. Again, they're going to be key values that will be leveraged by some other state initiatives. So let's talk a little bit about a problem we have. Since we know many of us have not been downloading these CCC IDs and storing in our system, we recognize that. And so we're building what's called the IDP proxy. And this IDP proxy is going to help solve this problem where you do not have your student CCC ID stored locally. When your student first attempts to access services, the following steps are going to kind of occur. First, we're going to check locally in your servers to determine if the person has an account, and if so, they're good to go, and they move on to finish doing what it is they need to do. If we do not find them locally, then this is where the IDP proxy is going to come into place. And we'll leverage this to determine if they have an existing valid CCC ID. So this IDP proxy is being set up at the tech center to be used by everyone centrally. Now, if they do not have an existing CCC ID, they've never applied to one of our colleges, then they'll be routed to a process to create a new account. Go through and create the account, and then at that stage, we'll get them back to your institution where they can continue doing the process that they went there to begin with. So again, what I just really want to focus on is you're going to want this piece of data to be surfaced so that you can leverage it both for today and future initiatives. So this is something that you can begin to start in and get this data loaded and surfaced so that you can leverage it later when needed. All right, let's talk a little bit about tenant admins and IDP metadata. Okay, the tenant admins and associations. These are the staff who will be configuring your portal. Maybe a technical webmaster in your IT department or under one of your public information offices. Just depends on your setup there. But we'll need one for each specific institution. So with the portal instance, you will get a instance for your district office as well as each individual college. If you choose not to use the district office one because there's no services, that's your choice. But we will provide all of those based on your MIS codes. And to get this list of tenant admins, we're going to really need just some basic information, the name of them, the email, phone number, and what college or institution they are associated with. Some will cover the entire district. Some will only be associated to a single institution. And one of the things that we're going to want to get is what is called the EPPN, the Edu-Person Principal Name. Now, this will have been identified during these initial kickoff calls when we did that deep dive onto the directory service attributes, but it really bears reiteration. This is a very critical piece of information needed to give you access to the portal configuration. And we must contain a valid CCC ID SAML attribute. Now, while this attribute looks very similar to an email address, it is not an email address. It is actually derived from the values in your directory services, and then there is a @domain.edu appended to the end of it, and that's kind of where that confusion comes into the email address. But what's very unique about, or what we need to do when we determine this identifier that will work for all users, is it has to have the following characteristics. It must be unique. It's never reassigned to another person. It's persistent, and it never or rarely changes. You can't have this key identifier being fluctuating from student to student because you could end up granting somebody rights that was originally here several years ago, and then if you reused it, you could be automatically granting that person rights, not realizing it based on that old name. So again, it needs to be unique and persistent. We'll do this final step here, which is to consume some metadata. We need to have the Unicon service provider metadata consumed locally. And then we will need your Shibboleth IDP metadata set up to Unicon for the portal setup if you are not a member of the InCommon Federation. Now, what is InCommon? The InCommon Federation is the U.S. Education and Research Identity Federation. It provides a common framework for trusted shared management of online resources. The real key component of this is it provides single sign-on convenience, and yet it allows the service providers to control access to their protected resources. One of the things I want to point out too is this is free to all community colleges through the Chancellor's Office. There was a memo that came out in April of 2015 to the listserv that has all of the information necessary to sign up. Be aware there are lots of services with InCommon certificates and some other types of issues, but the key value we really are looking at is the auto consumption of metadata. What this allows you to do is it allows the systems to automatically consume this metadata, and then therefore your local IT staff are not required to load and configure these services locally. Again, one less burden on your IT staff, free them up to do some things that you really need them to do. Okay, so we'll get into the final steps. Pretty simple processes on these final steps. We'll send you out an electronic copy of the portal administration manual. This manual administration document has been in the works, and we've got a great person here on staff, Diana Bishop, that's been doing some great work with this document. And so we'll get you a copy of that. We're also working on a student version of this as well, the student view, and that'll come out sometime in the future. One of the other pieces will be is to send you the portal URLs. These are unique URLs based on your IDP as well as your MIS code. And so as we go through this process and I ask you to validate that these are your MIS codes, it's so that we can define these URLs so that when your student goes to each of your unique institutions based on that MIS code, you can provide unique flavor and access to it. Pretty well. Once sends you that document and the URLs, then you basically are using your local credentials to log in. And if if we've done everything right along the process, voila, you can now configure to your heart's content. Finally, after a few days, we'll follow up and ask you to confirm a couple minor things just to close up some work case issues. Confirm that all of your tenant admins have access to the sites that they should be, and that the associations are set up properly. And then we'll also have you confirm that the test student accounts are working as well. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Q.
Thank you, Michael. Before we go into questions, I just want to remind you that if you have any additional resources, you check out our website, ccc.edplan.org. Located on there, we have a frequently asked questions page in which we also answer most of the pertinent questions about the student services portal. And as Mike mentioned earlier, our website address, epi@ccctechcenter.org, lists the email so that we can get in touch with us. Finally, we want to let you know that you can go ahead and do a recording of this webinar within 5 business days of this presentation. One final reminder, if you would like to ask a question or have any additional explanation about something that was discussed on the presentation, please place it in the lower left-hand side of our chat box. I'll go ahead and allow about a minute or so for people to ask questions. And so we have a question from Michelle who's asking, how do we see what this portal looks like? Michael, do you have a response for her?
Yeah, so we'd be happy actually to go to the planning.org website. There are some screenshots that are there. And of course, if you are interested in learning more about the portal, when I schedule a demo, we'd be happy to take you through the user interfaces, features, and all that.
Great. And I'll just give it another 30 seconds or so for any other questions that may be asked or if there's any follow-up. So someone is currently trying to type in a question right now, so while they're doing that, I'll go ahead and remind you to check out our website, edplan.org. In addition, I'd like to let you know that we will be hosting a webinar in approximately 2 weeks on a particular aspect of the portal, the career coach functionality that will be available there as well. So we want to let you know that you can go ahead and register for that on our website. It looks like we have another question from Connie at Palomar, and she asked, is this associated with the Starfish Hobsons initiative? Mike, why don't you go ahead and take that?
Sure. So it is associated with Hobson insofar as that the portal falls under the Educational Planning Initiative, where the Hobson initiative is also managed. So the funding comes from the same place. We are one team that is working to bring both of those things to the institution. And from a functional perspective, plan is to have institutions who are adopting Hobson have their students access the Hobson product through the statewide portal. So they are sort of in transition, yeah.
I'd like to add one little follow-up to that, and that is that the Shibboleth implementation and upgrade process is pretty well common across all of the initiatives, whether it be Hobson's or the Canvas or the portal. So that upgrade process will most likely occur for any one of the initiatives you use.
Great. And it looks like Connie has a follow-up question in that, will the portal also serve up common assessment for students?
That's actually a really great and timely question. So the assessment is on a fairly aggressive timeline. They are planning to deliver the functionality to a lot of schools in the next handful of months. The plan in the long term is to indeed have the assessment launch out of the portal as one of those external web applications that I mentioned kind of earlier on in the presentation. So to answer your question, yes. In the short term, it'll probably work a little bit differently in that the assessment will be a web application that exists sort of on its own. But as the portal begins to be deployed more and more frequently, we will be turning the assessment into a piece that is connected to the portal, yes.
Great. And it looks like there's one more question that may be coming in. And while we wait for that question, I just want to remind everyone that if you remember a question that you would like to have asked, please visit our website at .org and go to the frequently asked questions. You can post a question there, and our staff will be on hand to answer those questions. Or you can just email us directly at ci@edcenter.org, and we'd be happy to answer those questions for you. We'll go ahead and give it about another 15, 20 seconds to see if there's any additional questions. Okay. Well, it looks like there's no longer any additional questions, so we'd like to thank you for joining us today for this webinar. And as a reminder, you can go ahead and view the recording of this webinar if you have colleagues who are unable to attend it at our website, edplan.org. It will be available within 5 business days. Thank you for joining us today.